Hey guys, welcome back to section 9 in this presentation. In this chapter, we'll be discussing the Israelites. What I'm going to look to establish in this section is that God chose the Israelites above all nations and that they are a holy people. All of God's laws and commandments were only given to them, and therefore his judgments fell only upon them. They were sent as slaves into far off lands by ships. All the nations conspired against them like they do today. God would set up an ensign or a flag or a banner to remind them who they were from all four corners of the world at a later time. So that would be today. I'll define what the true meaning of the word Gentile is. I'll identify where the Israelites are living today. And lastly, I'll confirm that Jesus had just one mission, and that was to be set up as the Prince and Savior only for the Israelites. So with that being said here, let's get started. So what does God state about the Israelites? How does he describe them? So we'll go to Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6. This is in the Old Testament. He says, "For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God has chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth." So it's self-explanatory. He's saying, God is saying, look, I chose you to be my people out of all the nations of the world. That's it. Plain and simple. In the book of Psalms, chapter 147, verse 19 through 20, uh, the author is confirming that God said to him, he shows his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. And he goes on to say, God has not dealt so with any nation, and for his judgments, meaning if they stray from his commandments and his laws, no other nation has known them except the Israelites. That's what he's confirming in Psalms chapter 47, verse 19 through 20. And then in the New Testament, chapter 3, verse 1, 2, let's see, he says, "Hear this word that the Lord has spoken against you, O children of Israel, against the whole family which I brought up from the land of Egypt, saying, you only have I known of all the families of the earth. Therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities." So, I just took scriptures from the Old Testament and the New Testament, and you'll see they're validating one another. The Old Testament and the New Testament, they're saying the exact same thing, that God had chose the Israelites among all the nations of the world, and they're the only nations whose God's judgments fell upon for not following his laws and his commandments. Now, here's a prophecy. Even at the time when Moses was there, he confirmed that, God knows everything, right? He confirmed that there would come a time where they would be sent as slaves into different parts of the world. So let's delve into this. So this is Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 26. He said, "I said I would scatter them into corners. I would make the remembrance of them to cease from among men," meaning people would forget who the Israelites were. Mainly them. They would forget who they were. They would forget their identity. Now, this is in the book of 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 46. He says, "If they sin against thee, and there is no man that sinneth not, and thou be angry with them, and deliver them to the enemy, so that to carry them away captives unto the land of the enemy, far or near." Meaning, if they sin against me, meaning God, if they sin against me, he's saying, I'm going to carry them away as captives into the land of the enemy. He's saying whether it's far or it's near, it doesn't matter. This is going to be the judgment that will fall upon them. Now here we go. This is the book of 1 Maccabeus, chapter 3, verse 41. And he says, "And the merchants of the country, hearing the fame of them, took silver and gold very much with servants, and came into the camp to buy the children of Israel for slaves. A power also of Syria and of the land of the Philistines joined themselves unto them." So, and there's actually more to this, but if you were to read 1 Maccabeus, all the nations joined with the Greeks to buy them as slaves. This was back in Let me think. This was before Jesus came, and the same thing would happen a few hundred years later, and this was all prophesied. So the author in the book of Maccabees, he's confirming that they took gold and silver and they used that to buy the children of Israel as slaves. All right, let's keep going. So this is in the book of Psalms, chapter 83, verse 3 and 4. Now this was written approximately 2,600 years ago, or 588 years before Jesus came. He said, "They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more remembrance." And that's what's happened for the past, almost 2,000 years. The true Israelites, they've been forgotten. But you'll see there's prophecy confirming that there would come a time when they would start to wake up. And that's what you're seeing in the world today. But here, I'm digressing. Let me keep going. So now this is in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 37. And he says, "And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations where the Lord shall lead thee." I've heard arguments made that, that refers to them being called Negroes, blacks, and basically their identity would be changed. Their racial identity changed, and the Israelites would become Gentiles. So that's what's being stated here, and I'm just very briefly stating, what this is referring to. Now let's go on. This is in the book of the second book of Maccabees, chapter 6, verse 6 through 10. He's saying, "Neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days, or ancient fasts, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew." This is in the time of the Greeks. So laws made by the Greeks that Jews can't claim to be a Jew, Israelite, or claim their tribe. This was a law. And if you broke that law, they would kill you. This was what the Greeks were doing back when they took him as captive. And this was prophesied by God. And keep going here. And he says, "In the day of the king's birth every month, they were bought by bitter constraint to eat the sacrifices. And when the fast of Bacchus was kept, the Jews were compelled to go in possession to Bacchus carrying ivy." Let's break this down just so you know what's being said here. He's saying they were bought by bitter constraint to eat the sacrifices for the king's birthday. So the king had a birthday every month to celebrate him as king. And by bitter constraint, meaning they didn't want to do it, but by bitter constraint, they were forced to eat the sacrifices. Now, who's this Bacchus? So here, let me slide this over. So Bacchus, you ever seen that movie Narnia? So Bacchus is a guy who's like I think he's half sheep. Hold on, let me see. He is half boy and half goat. This is basically who Bacchus was. What you're seeing here this is Pan from Narnia. So let me go back here. So they forced them to honor this Bacchus with carrying ivy. So it was a custom that the Greeks had. So let's keep going. And then verse 8, he says, "Moreover, there went out a decree to the neighbor cities of the heathen by the suggestion of Ptolemy against the Jews, that they should observe the same fashions and be partakers of their sacrifices." So it was a law that they should observe the same fashions, sacrifices of the Greeks, and if they didn't want to do them, of course they were put to death. So what ends up happening is the Jews who were living among all the nations of the world at that time. When I say of all the world at that time, I'm referring into that region, right? So whether it's they were living in Greece, the Roman Empire, Arabia, anywhere they were living, India, wherever they had been scattered to, they became what's known as Gentiles. I'll define Gentile a little bit later, but they became what's known as a Gentile. So when Jesus was referring to the apostles to go out to the nations, among the Gentile nations, he was referring to the Jews who had become so ingrained in these other nations that they became Gentiles. That's what he was referring to by a Gentile. But the meaning of the word Gentile, it's been changed. But here, let me keep going. I'm digressing here. So he said, and whoso would not confirm themselves as to the manner of the Gentiles should be put to death. Let's see. And then he goes on to say that in that day there shall be a root of Jesse. He's referring to Jesus, which shall stand for an ensign to the people, to which shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. So what's he saying here? He's saying that there's going to come a time. So Jesus came from the root of Jesse. He's saying that the root of Jesse is Christ. To Christ shall the Gentiles seek. The Gentiles are the Israelites that were forced to become Gentiles by the Greeks. Okay? And how do we know this? Because God's laws and commandments, they were only given to the Israelites. The Holy Bible was only given to the Israelites. So when he's referring to Gentile, he's only referring to these Israelites who had become ingrained in these other nations and not forgot their identity, but they just became part of it, and they slowly started to forget who they were. But those are the Gentiles. So here, let me keep going. Okay, let me pause here and let me bring in. So I googled the word Gentile in Wikipedia. Now pay very close attention to how they define it. Gentile, from Latin, it means gentleness. And then it says, is an entheonym that commonly means non-Jew. Okay? The key word there is they said commonly. Why would they say commonly means non-Jew? Because the Roman Catholic Church changed the definition of the word Gentile. So in Christianity and in Catholicism, the word Gentile means any nation that's not Jewish. That's what they say. But according to the real Israelites, and even theologians know this, professors who study history, they know this. The Roman Catholic Church knows this very well, that the word Gentile means any Jew that absorbed the customs of another nation and they became that nation. So like, I'll give you an example. I'm Assyrian. I came to the United States when I was 4 months old. Yeah, I'm Assyrian, but I consider myself American. So, if I were to flip that around and say, okay, I was an Israelite, I was a Jew, I came to the United States and I've been living here all my life, I consider myself American, I'd be considered a Gentile because by blood, I'm a Jew. But I've adopted, the culture, the religion of the United States, so therefore I'm a Gentile according to what the word means, the definition of the word means by the Israelites. But again, according to the Roman Catholic Church, the word Gentile means anyone who's a non-Jew, which is not true. That's not true at all. So let's go back. Now I'm gonna speed things up because I've got like 3 minutes remaining in this chapter. So this is just confirming that the Lord would scatter them among all the nations of the world. Even Moses had prophesied they would do that. And then he would set up the Bible. Now he says he'll set up an ensign for the nations, meaning at a later time, he would set up this Bible, and Judah, the tribe of Judah, which is what they're doing today, they would help push this truth to their people. So now this is a map confirming the slave trade. And you'll see here in this legend on the left side, you'll see the British, the Portuguese, the French, the Spanish, the Dutch moving the African American, not African American, we'll just call them the Israelites, being moved from Africa to all these different parts of North, Central, and South America. And I actually pulled this from a history book. So you can see that all of these inhabitants of the North American and South American continent, all these black slaves, they came from Africa. And what do the Israelites look like today? This is probably what they look like. This is what they look like today. You've got all the Latinos, so everywhere from Central America all the way down to South America, these are the Israelite nations. And here's also a map confirming that. Not a map, but a legend with all of those nations. I'll be back with part two in just a minute.